Welcome to the Build Your Private Practice podcast, a space for Canadian therapists who want to support others, make an impact, and build a sustainable practice that works for them too. I'm your host, Liane Wood, a registered psychotherapist, group practice owner, and business mentor, and I'm here to help you build a private practice that allows you to keep doing the work you love without burning out. Because the people who need your help the most are counting on you, and you deserve a practice that supports you while you support them. Let's dive in. Here's what I wish someone had told me about starting a private practice. The systems you set up in your first 6 months will decide whether you grow steadily or burn out trying. Booking by email, tracking sessions in a spreadsheet, chasing payments, that's the path most practitioners regret. Jane is the practice management software that I point BYPP members to when they're setting up their first practice. Scheduling, charting, billing, and online payments all in one place. Built in Canada by people whose mission is to help the helpers. New to practice? Check out the new practice guide from Jane. Links are in the show notes below. Well, welcome back to the Build Your Private Practice podcast. I'm your host, Liane Wood, and this is the podcast for Canadian mental health practitioners who are ready to build a private practice that supports your life, not one that quietly drains you in the name of helping people. Today's episode is just me and you, and a topic that's been turning over in my head all weekend. So here we go. Last Friday afternoon, I had 4 discovery calls back to back. Different therapists, different clinics, different cities, different stages of practice, and different surface problems. And by the time the last call ended and I was closing my laptop, I had this kind of strange feeling like I had just had the same conversation 4 times in a row in 4 different voices. Now, nobody on those calls was in a crisis and nobody was burned out to the point of leaving the field. Nobody had a practice that was falling apart. And none of them had a story I would describe as urgent. What each of them had was something much quieter, a small, persistent thing they could not ignore anymore, different in every case, and the same underneath. So I want to talk about that today because I think the moment those 4 therapists were in, and the reason they all reached out in the same week without knowing each other, is one of the most important moments in a practice's life. And I can't think of anyone who's talking about it. So let me tell you a little bit more about those 4 calls. And I'm going to keep this deliberately vague. No names, no identifying details, no city, no specialty, but the texture of the conversation is what matters here. And so I want you to hear it. The first call was with a therapist who'd been running a solo practice for about 6 years. Her waitlist was not moving the way that it used to. And she couldn't say exactly when it had changed, just that she used to see more people coming onto the waitlist, and now it was sitting there. And people were dropping off without booking. And she had this nagging feeling that the system she'd been relying on for years was quietly not working the same way anymore. She wasn't panicked about it, and she didn't have an empty schedule. Income was still coming in, and she actually said, almost apologetically, and I'm going to remember this, she said, "I don't even know if I should be on this call. Nothing is technically wrong." Now, the second call was with a clinic owner who had been thinking about changing her fees for over a year. Over a year. She'd done all the math. She drafted the email to her clients. She just had not sent it. And every time she got close, something else would come up and the email would get pushed back another month. What she was tired of was not the fee change itself, it was the thinking about it. The mental tab that had been open in the background of her brain for 14 months. This is exhausting in a way that is hard to describe for someone who has not lived it. The third call was with a therapist who had a small team of associates. And there was a conversation she needed to have with one of them about the direction of the work. Not a difficult conversation exactly, and not conflict, just a conversation. And she'd been rehearsing it in her head for months. While she was walking the dog, while she's in the shower, before bed, in the car. Always rehearsing, but never actually having the conversation. And she said something on the call that I've been thinking about. She said, "I can't tell anymore if I'm avoiding it or if I'm just being thoughtful." The fourth call was with a clinician who had built a really beautiful practice. By any external measure, she was doing well. Full caseload, good income, steady reputation. And she sat down on the call and she said, I think this practice is the right practice for who I was 3 years ago. I don't think it's the right practice for who I am now. And I don't know what to do with that. That was the texture of last Friday. Now, here's the thing, not one of those women would have described herself as in a crisis. Not one of them used the word burnout, and nobody was crying on the call. Nobody was at the end of the rope. And if you'd asked any of them on Friday morning before the call with me, hey, how's your practice going? They all would have said, honestly, it's going pretty well. But there was a signal in every one of them, that small, persistent, quiet signal that the next phase of their practice needed something different from the current one. And they had each, in their own way, decided to stop ignoring it. And so that's the moment that I want to talk about today because I think it's the most undervalued moment in a practice's whole life. Here is what struck me after that fourth call ended. Most of the messaging in our profession and most of the coaching content that I see online is built around the moment of crisis, the breaking point, burnout, the empty calendar, the I cannot do this anymore moment. And there's a reason for that. Crisis is loud. Crisis is dramatic. Crisis makes for compelling headlines and emotional carousels. The I almost left the profession before I found this. Or I was crying in my car between sessions until I learned this one thing. Those stories travel. They get shared and they make people stop scrolling. The side effect of all that messaging, though, is that somewhere along the way, many of us have come to believe that you should not reach out for help until things are quote unquote bad enough to justify it, until you've earned it, until the pain is loud enough that no reasonable person would tell you to wait, until you have a story that's dramatic enough to deserve the time of a coach or a colleague or a mentor, until the cracks are no longer cracks. We wait until it's visible damage. And so I want to push back on that gently today. Because here's what I see over and over in my work with practitioners. The therapists who wait for crisis pay the highest price. And it's not because they are weak or unaware or unwise. It's actually the opposite. They are usually the most thoughtful, the most ethical, and the most reluctant to make a fuss humans in the room. And that's exactly why they wait. They do not wait to take up space they have not earned. And they do not want to be the kind of therapist who calls something a problem before it really is a problem. And the cost of that waiting is real. A wait list that is not moving like it used to and is ignored for a year becomes an empty schedule and an income panic. A fee change postponed for a year becomes another 12 months of resentment, plus the back pay you will never recover. A team conversation rehearsed for months becomes a resignation email you did not see coming. A vague sense that your practice does not quite fit anymore, ignored for 2 more years, becomes a quiet, slow disengagement from the work itself. And in every one of those cases, the practitioner could have addressed the issue when it was small, when it was manageable, when it was a 1 week project, not a 6 month untangling. She did not because she was waiting for it to be bad enough. And by the time it's bad enough, the repair work is 3 times harder. And by that point, the practitioner is tired in a way that makes it even harder to do anything. So let me give you some examples of what I mean by the early signal, because I think part of why we miss these moments is that nobody's ever named them out loud for us. We don't necessarily have a vocabulary for them, and we do have a vocabulary for crisis. We may not have a vocabulary for the thing that comes a year before crisis. The early signal is rarely a crisis. It's almost never a thing you would mention to a colleague. It's the kind of thing that if a friend asked you how your practice was going over coffee, you wouldn't bring up because you wouldn't think to. So here are some of the ones I see the most often. Listen for the one that makes your stomach drop just a little, and that's the one. A booking system that worked fine for years and is suddenly creating friction. You cannot quite say what's changed. Maybe it's the volume, Maybe it's a software update. Maybe it's you. You're just noticing more friction than there used to be, and you've started dreading the parts of your week that involve managing the calendar. A wait list that used to move and is not moving now. It's not empty, it's just slower. People dropping off without booking. Inquiries that do not turn into clients the way they used to. You haven't tracked it, you just feel it. A fee change you've been postponing for a year or more. You know your fee needs to move. You've known for a while and you haven't done it. Every time you sit down to do it, something else takes priority, and that something else is suspiciously always available right when it's time to look at your fees. A team conversation you keep rehearsing about direction, about scope, about fit. You're not avoiding it because you don't know what to say. You're avoiding it because saying it will change something. A sense that the offer you're selling is not quite the offer you would build if you were starting your practice today. The practice fit you 3 years ago, and you've grown since then. The practice has not necessarily grown with you. A feeling when you look at your calendar for the next quarter that something is slightly off. You can't name what, you just notice that you do not feel the way you used to feel when you looked at it. A reluctance to look at the numbers, not avoidance exactly, just a quiet inner negotiation every time the accountant sends the monthly report. You'll get to it tomorrow. You always will get to it tomorrow. Are any of these landing for you right now? Any one of them? I want you to notice that none of these is a crisis. None of them would justify a panicked Friday night email to a colleague. None of those would feel quote unquote big enough to bring to a coaching call without an apology. And none of those would make a compelling Instagram caption. And all of them, in my experience, are the moments most worth paying attention to. The cracks are not the breakdown, they are the early warning. They are the thing your practice is telling you in the only language it knows how to use before the bigger problem arrives. So I want to put a finer point on this because I think the math of it makes the better case than anything else I could say. A fee change addressed in the month you first notice it is, in my experience, a 1 to 2 week project. You run the math, you decide on a new number, you write the email, you send the email, and you sit with the discomfort for a week and you move on. Whereas a fee change postponed for a year and then addressed is a different project entirely. By that point, your resentment has grown. The math has shifted, and the decision is now wrapped up in identity questions and comparison questions and fear questions and a year of accumulated stories about what changing your fee means to you. The mechanics are the same. The emotional weight is 10 times heavier. And you've lost a year of income difference, which you will never get back. A waitlist issue, addressed in the month you first notice it, is a small course correction. You look at the inquiry to booking process, you find the friction, you fix it, and you move on. A waitlist issue postponed for a year is by that point an income problem, a confidence problem, a marketing program, and a what am I doing wrong problem, all wrapped together. And by then, the practitioner is often questioning the entire practice, when in reality, all that happened was a small operational issue that went unaddressed for too long and got tangled up in sense of self. A team conversation had in the month you first sensed it needed to happen is a 15-minute conversation, maybe uncomfortable, almost always survivable, and often clarifying. A team conversation postponed for a year is sometimes a resignation or a slow disengagement that costs you a great team member because you waited too long to say what needed to be said. In every one of these examples, the early version of the problem is small, contained, and solvable. The late version is bigger, messier, and tangled up in other things that have nothing to do with the original issue. This is the math I think no one is showing you. It's not that you should reach out at the first time of trouble because reaching out is virtuous. It is that by the time the trouble gets loud, you're tired. The problem is bigger, your options have narrowed, and the cost of fixing it is meaningfully higher than it would have been 6 months earlier. The cheapest, kindest, most efficient time to address a quiet signal is when it is still quiet. Here's what I think makes this so hard, because none of what I just described is intellectually complicated. The cost of solving a problem early is lower than the cost of solving it late. We all know that in some part of us. We know it about our clients, and we would say it back to anyone who asked us. So the hard part is not the logic. The hard part is the part underneath the logic, the part that has us postponing the small problem until it's a big problem, the part that has us waiting for crisis instead of catching the signal. And I think there is a specifically therapist version of why this is so hard. You spend your entire professional life sitting with other people in moments of vulnerability. You are the steady one. You are the one who holds the room. You're trained professionally and ethically to bring a level of care, presence, and self regulation to your work that the rest of the world is not asked to bring to theirs. And that training is a gift. It really is. And I think it is also quietly a trap. Because somewhere along the way, many of us internalize the idea that asking for help is something other people do. Clients do it, friends in non clinical fields do it. We are the ones being asked, we are the resource, and we are the steady ones. So when a small signal shows up in our own practice, the conditioned response is often handle it. Quietly, think it through, sit with it, process it on your own. Bring it to your own therapy if it gets bad enough. What does not occur to many of us until much later than it should is the simple option of saying out loud to another human being, I noticed a small thing. I want to talk to someone about it before it gets bigger. That is not weakness, and that is not failure to handle your own stuff. That is the basic, sane, professional move that every other industry takes for granted. Lawyers consult other lawyers, doctors consult with other doctors, and accountants call other accountants. Nobody in any of those fields is expected to figure everything out in their own head, and you do not have to either. So here's what I want to invite you into as we come to the end of this episode. Sometime this week, maybe today, maybe on a walk, maybe in one of those in between moments while you're either making dinner, driving home, or folding laundry, I want you to ask yourself one question. Is there something quietly nagging at me about my practice? Not a crisis, not a fire, not something I would tell a friend about over coffee, just a small thing, a signal, a waitlist that's not moving like it used to, a fee change that keeps getting postponed, a conversation you keep rehearsing, a vague sense that the practice doesn't quite fit anymore, a reluctance to open the spreadsheet, friction in the booking system, a feeling about my schedule that I've not named yet out loud. If something comes up, and for most of you something will, I would just invite you to write it down. Not to fix it today, not to make a plan today, just put it on paper somewhere only you will see. Because here is the thing about quiet signals. They tend to grow louder when you ignore them and quieter when you acknowledge them. The simple act of naming a small thing on a page sometimes resolves half the energy around it on its own. You realize it's not as big as you felt it was in your head, or you realize it is bigger than you thought, and that is information too. Either way, naming it is the beginning of doing something about it. And then, if you decide it needs more than naming, if it is the kind of thing that wants a conversation, and please don't wait for it to get bigger before you bring it to someone, the cheapest, kindest, and most efficient time to address it is right now, while it's still small. That person can be a colleague, a peer mastermind, a trusted mentor, a therapist of your own, a coach, a friend in business. It doesn't have to be me. It doesn't have to be anyone formal. It just has to be someone who can help you think. The 4 women on my calendar last Friday were doing the version of this they had access to. They reached out at the small signal moment instead of waiting for crisis. And here is what I will tell you because I've watched this play out hundreds of times now. They will not end up in the harder version of their problem 6 months from now. They will end up somewhere quieter and earlier and with more options. And that is what catching it early buys you. Okay, a few last things before I let you go. If this episode has landed for you, if there's a quiet signal you've been carrying that you just realized you've been carrying, I would actually love to hear about it. not to sell you anything, just because I want to know. You can email me, you can find me on Instagram, send me a DM. I read every single one, I really do. And if you know another therapist who is in this exact spot, the spot where things are not broken, but something is starting to whisper, please share this episode with them. Quiet signals do not get talked about enough in our profession, and I think the more of us who name them out loud, the easier it gets for the next person to do the same. If you are new to this podcast, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. The easiest way to make sure you do not miss a new episode is to hit subscribe or follow in whatever app you're listening in. New episodes come out every Monday. Before I go, one more thing. I want to say it directly because I think some of you need to hear it. The therapists I work with are not broken. The 4 women on my calendar last Friday were not broken. They were smart, ethical, capable practitioners who had each on their own noticed something small and decided to take it seriously before it became something big. That's not weakness, and that's not overreacting. That's wisdom. And if that's you right now, listening to this with one specific thing in mind, one quiet signal that has been nagging at you for longer than you want to admit, please trust that signal. You're not making it up. You're not overreacting and you're not jumping the gun. You are doing exactly what the most thoughtful practitioners do. You're catching it early. Take care of yourself, take care of your practice, and I'll be back next Monday. Thanks so much for tuning in to the Build Your Private Practice podcast. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd love it if you'd subscribe, leave a review, or share it with a fellow Canadian therapist who needs this. And remember, the work you do matters. Keep showing up, keep holding space, and keep building a practice that works for you. If you're looking for practical tools or support to grow your practice with more clarity and confidence, head to buildyourprivatepractice.ca. There's lots waiting for you there. I'll see you next time.